Now for another exciting episode of Eric Walks Through a Park and Rants Angrily into a Camera about the government's pandemic response. So apparently Ontario has decided to get serious about the pandemic now. And I mean like super serial now, not like the last time. They're actually taking some significant measures this time. It's taken a long time to get to the point where they've gotten super serial. We're now at the point where we're thick into the third wave. The ICUs in the province are well overwhelmed, and we're now in the several thousand cases per day mark. This is the worst the pandemic has been as yet, even worse than the second wave or the first wave. And the reason for that is that we half-assed our pandemic control measures. Instead of doing a circuit breaker lockdown, like other nations have done, which have successfully controlled the pandemic, we've just done this series of half-assed measures that aren't all that effective. In terms of what is effective, that goes to what the nature of this virus is. We now know a lot more than we did at the start of this, obviously. So we now know that the primary transmission method is aerosols. When you breathe out air, virus particles go with that air, and if somebody else inhales enough virus particles, they're going to get it. And you need to get a certain number of virus particles in order to actually develop an infection. Your immune system's able to deal with a couple of them, but if you inhale quite a few of them, then, well, you're going to get COVID. So the best way to control the spread of the pandemic is to control the amount of other people's air that people are breathing in. The easiest way to do that is get people outside. None of the people behind me here are in any danger at all of me infecting them if I had COVID, because none of the air that I'm breathing out they're going to catch, or even if they get really, really lucky, they might get a virus particle or two. So what we want to be doing is encouraging people to do the right thing, do these sorts of social activities. Because human beings are social animals, and we need our recreation, otherwise we go bonkers. We can't really live isolated by ourselves without losing our minds. So people are going to socialize one way or the other. You can't stop them from doing that. So if you want people to be safe, you need to encourage them to do the right thing, socialize in a safe way, get people outside as much as possible. And, yes, get them not to be inside together. Basically, throughout this pandemic, we've been doing the exact wrong things in Ontario to control the pandemic. The most effective thing to do is, as soon as there is a community-based spread, you shut down everything. Get everyone to stay away from everybody else, stop all vectors of transmission, let the virus die out, and then you can go back to life as normal. That's what New Zealand did, that's what Korea did, that's what basically every other sane nation in the world did. And so now they're able to go on back to life as normal. In New Zealand, there's soccer matches, people are hugging and going to parties, and it's as if there's not a pandemic going on at all, because there is no pandemic going on in New Zealand. But instead here, we did this weird half measure, this partial closure of places where people can catch the infection, but not all of them, and not in the most effective way either. And so rather than just stopping the infection and then being able to go back to normal, we've just had this ongoing, dragging pandemic outbreak basically throughout, to the point where we can't have any fun. The economy is suffering severely because of all this back and forth bullshit, and people are dying. Like, people are literally losing their lives because of these ineffective half measures. As a meme went that crossed my timeline yesterday, nobody's pro-lockdown. Like, nobody really wants to do a lockdown. But what we are is anti-ineffective half measures. Because, yeah, lockdown sucks. You don't really want to do that. But once it's over, you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to actually have any other pandemic control measures if there's no virus to be controlled. So if we'd done that, then we'd be in a much better situation. But we didn't do that. Okay, fine. So we're in the situation we're in. We're now in the midst of a third wave. Cases are higher than they were in the first two waves, which is pretty scary. ICUs are overloaded. Folks with other chronic conditions, if they're in a situation where they need an ICU, well, they're not going to get one. And the healthcare system is just teetering on a brink. And so now the Ontario government is getting super serial about this, and they've implemented some new measures. Okay, great. Well, what are those measures? Well, until today, they included closing playgrounds. And as we've discussed just now, outdoor transmission is not a thing. It's not a vector that is significant. And so why would they do this? I do not know. What isn't on the table, though, is closing things like warehouses, meatpacking plants, doing more in prisons, closing, schools are finally closed, but that should have been done weeks ago. These are places where people are indoors in relatively close proximity, breathing each other's air. And as we know, this is how the virus is transmitted. So the most effective thing to do would be to start there. Start with the places where people are going to be in close proximity, breathing each other's air. The root of the problem with these new measures is that they are negative in character. It's about what you can't do, rather than what you should be doing instead. Among these measures includes... Oh, there's a dog. No worries. Included in these measures is an authorization for police to be able to basically stop anybody who's out in public or driving a car and ask them what their home address is, where they're going, and why. And this, I presume, is a way to get people to avoid doing things that are dangerous or frivolous or whatever else. But simply being in public, as we've already discussed, is not a risk. Me walking around this park is not at risk. But a police officer could, in theory, stop me right now, ask me what I'm doing and where I'm going and why. The thing to remember, though, is that this isn't actually new. The police have always had the right to stop anybody and question them, ask those questions. Nothing has actually changed about that. All they have to do is say that they're conducting an investigation or that you resemble a suspect or something like that, and they have every right to stop you, ask you to identify yourself. And if you don't identify yourself, provide an identification, they do have the right to detain you. Me, as a white dude, I've never had a real problem with this. I've been stopped once late at night while I was riding my bike home. Apparently I looked like a suspect or something like that. I don't really believe it. But I was asked to provide an identification and all that good stuff. I was tempted to use my white dude privilege and refuse, but I wasn't feeling particularly ballsy on that particular night. But imagine not being a white dude. Imagine being a person of color, imagine being specifically black, for whom an encounter with police is sometimes fatal. This is a racist and classist set of policies. The people who are subject to the restrictions, to the punitive, to the negative aspects of these policies are overwhelmingly of working class or lower class. They're overwhelmingly people of color. And they're overwhelmingly people that don't have any other option. One of the main things that would control the pandemic, that would solve a lot of this problem, is paid sick leave. Until this government, the Conservative Party of Ontario, took over, Ontario had mandated paid sick leave for businesses. So that if you were sick, you could take one of your paid sick days, stay home, and avoid transmitting the infection. But one of the first actions of this government when they came in was to bow to their business buddies and remove that measure. So now paid sick leave is not a thing, and so anybody who is sick, feeling sick, well, they kind of have to go to work, because A, if they don't make the money because they're not being paid for staying home sick, they're not going to be able to pay the rent. B, it contributes to this culture of presenteeism, where if you stay home because you're sick, This is characterized as like lazy, costing the company money, that sort of thing. And so it's not built into our work culture to encourage people to stay home when they really ought to stay home. So people are showing up to their places of business, to warehouses, to construction sites, to all those sorts of places when they're potentially sick with COVID and they're spreading it all over the place. Anyway, this has kind of gone on a bit too long as a rant. I'm still angry at you, Doug. The science knows what's going on. They've been screaming at you, telling you that what policies have been implemented have been ineffective and that people are dying as a result. Would you please, Doug, listen to the scientists? Do what is right for all of us. Save the economy by saving lives. Anyway, I make videos daily if you enjoy this content. Algorithmic stuff. And thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.